Last Saturday, I watched a friend of mine, Leo, absolutely command a rooftop party. He's the guy everyone wants to be around, constantly moving, laughing, his phone buzzing every 30 seconds like a live wire. His face was flushed with that high-energy glow, the kind that looks like a perpetual dopamine hit. When I finally caught him for a second and asked how he kept up the pace, he looked at me like I'd asked why he breathes. "You just stay connected," he said, gesturing to the crowd. "If you're not out here, you're missing the world. People who stay home, they're just stagnant." But then I noticed another guy sitting near the edge of the terrace, looking out at the city's skyline. He wasn't on his phone. He wasn't looking for a conversation. He seemed perfectly content in the silence. Most people in the room had already written him off as boring or socially awkward. Someone even whispered that he looked a bit out of it, like he was missing the real experience happening 10 feet away. But here's the twist. According to the latest breakthroughs in neuroscience and evolutionary psychology, that guy by the railing isn't missing anything. In fact, his brain might be operating on a much more sophisticated level than the rest of the room. While Leo is frantically chasing the next dopamine spike from a stranger's laugh, the quiet guy's brain is likely navigating a long path, neural circuitness, processing deep subtexts, analyzing complex social dynamics, and integrating information with a level of richness that high-stimulation environments actually disrupt. What we've been taught to call antisocial or introverted isn't a personality flaw or a deficit. In reality, it might be the ultimate form of cognitive efficiency and intrapersonal intelligence that actually thrives by turning the volume down. Why does a high IQ often lead to a desire for less social contact? And why is the modern world's obsession with constant connection actually a sign of a less evolved adaptation to our environment? It's time to look at the silent intelligence.
Wow. That's such a perfect entry point for what we're going to get into today. It just perfectly frames the exact cultural tension we're here to, dissolve.
It really feels like we're living in that rooftop party all the time now.
We are. And our mission in this deep dive is to move way beyond those superficial social labels like boring or awkward. We're here to look at the actual evidence, neurobiological, evolutionary, sociological, that shows what we often call antisocial, is in fact a really complex state of high cognitive efficiency.
So it's not a bug, it's a feature. We're reframing introversion as a strategic adaptation.
Exactly. And to do that, we've pulled sources from, well, a really wide net. We're looking at everything from clinical neuroscience and Jungian personality theory, all the way to complex systems mathematics and cross-cultural leadership studies.
A real deep dive then.
For sure. We're going to unpack the structural differences in the brain that make silence not just preferable, but necessary for high function. We'll expose the huge professional bias against quieter temperaments. And then ultimately, we're going to demonstrate why this silent intelligence is actually becoming the critical infrastructure for cultural and even civilizational endurance in a pretty volatile world.
So that guy at the party, the one retreating, he might be the one doing the real mental heavy lifting.
That's the core idea we need to explore.
I think we have to start right there then. Inside the head. If the quiet observer and the life of the party are, perceiving the world through such radically different lenses, what's the neurobiological architecture that's actually dictating this? Let's talk about the hardware.
The difference is it's absolutely foundational, and it really centers on two functional and chemically distinct neurological pathways. And these are governed primarily by two major neurotransmitters, dopamine and acetylcholine.
Right. Dopamine gets all the press. It's the go-get-it chemical, the one that makes us chase the next win, the next social interaction.
That's right. And for extroverts, the key system is the Mesolimbic dopamine system. It's a reward circuit. It motivates us toward external action. But here's the crucial finding from the research. Studies show that extroverts actually exhibit less reactivity in this system when they're presented with external stimuli.
Wait, less? I would have thought it was more.
It's counterintuitive, I know. Think of it like a dimmer switch that's just set lower by default. To achieve the same level of, say, optimal arousal or satisfaction, the extroverted brain requires a higher volume of external input. It needs more people, more risk, more novelty, more noise.
So my friend Leo at the party, his brain was basically calibrated to require that constant strong flow of signals just to feel optimally engaged. He's not just choosing to be loud. His hardware demands it.
Precisely. They're seeking volume just to feel normal, to feel stimulated. Now let's flip that to the introverted brain. The introverted system reaches that dopamine saturation point much, much more quickly.
Their dimmer switch is more sensitive.
Way more sensitive. So a high stimulation environment, like that loud rooftop terrace, it doesn't feel rewarding or invigorating at all. It triggers what's called rapid over-arousability. The system hits its capacity almost immediately, and the feeling that results is, well, it's overwhelming fatigue. It's a neurochemical demand for retreat.
That reframes everything. It's not that introverts are less interested in rewards. It's that their reward circuit is satisfied much faster, which then forces them to switch to a different kind of processing. It's like their cup is full, and now they need to focus on digestion, not more consumption.
That digestion phase is the critical shift. Once an introvert moves past that rapid dopamine saturation, they transition to a completely different operational mode. And this one is governed by the acetylcholine system.
Okay, so what does acetylcholine specialize in compared to the external drive of dopamine?
Acetylcholine is really strongly associated with sustained attention, with long-term memory consolidation, and what the researchers call deep processing.
So it's the focus chemical.
It's the focus and internal work chemical. And this is where the core architectural difference really emerges. The neural pathway that introverts favor, once they shift into this acetylcholine-driven mode, it's described in the neuroscience research as being longer and more complex.
The long path. I remember that from the intro. So when that quiet guy was sitting by the railing, what was actually happening on that longer neural path?
Instead of a rapid external reaction, the information takes this internal detour. The signal travels through brain areas that are associated with abstract problem solving, with planning, with integrating new data into long-term memory.
Can you give us an analogy for that?
Sure. Imagine the extrovert's pathway is like a high-speed direct route from your eyes or ears straight to the action center of your brain. It's a reflex. The introvert's pathway, on the other hand, it includes a stop at the library, a quick consult with the historical archives, and maybe a detour to the planning department before any response is formulated.
So the output, the response, is just inherently richer. It's not just a surface-level reaction. It's been cross-referenced with all their existing knowledge and long-term context.
Yeah.
That sounds incredibly demanding.
It is. It's extremely demanding. And this brings us to a critical point from the sources. The cognitive cost of socializing.
Right. We tend to think of socializing as leisure, as rest.
We do, but for people who are calibrated for this deep processing, it is intense cognitive work. Their brain is analyzing the world in like high-fidelity, high-resolution detail.
Okay, so paint a picture of that. If I'm an introvert at a dinner party, what are the nonstop mental tasks that are draining my brain's glucose reserves?
Okay, so your brain isn't just listening to the words being spoken. It's performing all these simultaneous, resource-intensive tasks. It's meticulously analyzing subtle subtext. It's interpreting micro-expressions for any shift in emotion. It's processing the subtle hierarchy and the dynamics of the group.
And then it's trying to formulate a response to all of that.
Exactly, a response that is considered ponderous and not just automatically generated. And this whole process demands intense metabolic support. There's research that actually measures brain glucose consumption, the brain's fuel, and it's confirmed that introverts use significantly more of it during social interactions compared to extroverts.
Just actual physical depletion. That explains why after, say, 2 hours of networking, an introvert doesn't just feel tired, they feel genuinely drained, like they've run a mental marathon.
Precisely. And this is why it's so important to define the trait correctly. We need to move past the idea that this is a choice or some kind of moral failing. It's a demonstrable metabolic reality. And this is vital because introversion is so often and so unfairly conflated with things like shyness or neuroticism.
Right, let's clarify those differences, especially shyness. Shyness is fundamentally about fear, isn't it?
Yes. Shyness is an anxiety state. It's specifically the fear of negative judgment or social disapproval. You might be highly motivated to interact, but fear is what holds you back. Introversion, though, it's not fear. It's just a simple preference for a quiet, minimally stimulating environment, because that environment is what optimizes your function.
So one is a nervous emotional barrier, and the other is just a preference for optimal operating conditions, like needing a quiet room to do complex math.
That's a perfect way to put it.
So beyond the stereotypes, what are the key defining characteristics of introversion then?
Well, if we go back to Jungian theory, it's defined as applying your energy to the internal world, to the ego. The defining characteristics are, a deep preference for quiet concentration, the tendency to consistently think before you speak to, engage that long path, and listening far more critically than you talk. You're drawing energy from your internal reserves.
And how does this connect to the concept of the highly sensitive person, or HSP? That seems like a related but maybe distinct idea.
It's a critical overlap. The HSP concept, from Elaine Aron's work, refers to sensory processing sensitivity. It affects about 15 to 20% of the population. And while not all HSPs are introverts, about 30% are actually socially comfortable extroverts, the mechanism of over-arousability is a shared defining trait.
And there's an acronym for this, right? DOSE.
Yes, the DOSE acronym really captures the shared traits beautifully.
Okay, let's walk through that framework just to make sure we understand how the sensory sensitivity relates to the cognitive depth we've been talking about.
Okay, so D stands for depth of processing. This is the mechanism we just detailed. That strong internal desire to understand, to analyze, and to apply deep reflection to every experience. This is why HSPs and deep introverts often take longer to make decisions. They're constantly turning over solutions and possibilities.
Which means they're more likely to catch mistakes that others might miss.
Exactly. The cognitive depth is a huge advantage, but it consumes time and energy.
Then we have O for over-arousability.
Yes, that's the rapid dopamine saturation we discussed. Because the brain is taking in and processing information with such depth and fidelity, it just gets overwhelmed very quickly by too much input, whether it's social, auditory, or visual.
Makes sense. And the E and S.
E is for emotional sensitivity and empathy. Because they process information deeply, they also process emotional content deeply. This results in high empathy, a keen awareness of others' moods, which of course adds to the cognitive load in social settings.
You're not just processing data, you're processing feelings.
Right. And finally, S is sensory sensitivity. This is a vulnerability to physical overstimulation. Things like uncontrolled noise, harsh fluorescent lights, or strong odor stimuli that other people just filter out can become genuinely painful or distracting for a sensitive brain.
Okay, so to sum up this first part, the introverted brain is characterized by this long, deep, resource-intensive cognitive route. It's fueled by acetylcholine, and it needs a low stimulation environment to avoid sensory overload. It's a high-fidelity engine that just can't run optimally in rush hour traffic.
Precisely. It's built for complex, sustained performance, not for rapid, superficial sprints.
That frames the internal reality perfectly. So now, let's take that powerful, quiet engine and put it into the modern workplace and society, which seems fundamentally structured against it. We have to tackle this extrovert ideal.
Yes, and this ideal is, it's pervasive, especially in Western culture. It's this omnipresent belief that the ideal self has to be gregarious, assertive, charismatic, and totally comfortable dominating the spotlight. The bias is so deep it dictates who gets promoted, who's seen as competent, and who we deem a leader.
Was it always like this, though? I mean, did ancient societies also just worship the loudest person in the room?
Not at all. The shift is actually historically sharp and pretty recent. Before the big industrial and migration shifts of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Western society adhered to what historians call a culture of character.
Character.
Meaning people were valued for their internal integrity, their morals, the strength of their deeds. But with urbanization and the rise of mass media, that shifted very quickly into the culture of personality.
The era of the salesman and the PR expert.
Exactly. Charm, magnetism, the ability to command attention in a big crowd, these became the valuable characteristics. The external presentation started to matter more than the internal substance, and this created a profound bias favoring the man of action over the man of contemplation.
And this bias has translated into measurable professional disparity today. The numbers we looked at they're truly shocking.
They are. Introverts make up somewhere between 1/3 and 1/2 of the general population. That's up to half the workforce. Yet the statistics show they hold a mere 4% of company management positions.
4%? That's staggering.
It means extroverts hold the other 96%. This isn't just unfortunate. It's a colossal waste of talent that's rooted in a deep institutional bias.
And we know this bias is active, right? There was a 2006 survey where 65% of senior corporate executives openly said they saw introversion as a barrier to leadership.
Yes, and if that many people in power actively believe that quietness equals incompetence, you can see how that manifests in the hiring and evaluation tools we use every single day.
It's all about rewarding the behaviors that naturally favor the dopamine-driven external processor.
Exactly. Evaluation tools, hiring assessments, even our educational settings. They're all designed to capture and reward things like initiating discussions, taking immediate control of group activities, and just highly active participation.
You're essentially punishing the person who needs time to think deeply before they speak.
We are. The research is clear on this. Even if you have the underlying competence, just acting introverted in a public context, like not speaking first, not dominating the space, it significantly inhibits other people's perception of you as a leader.
Which forces introverts into what some of the sources called pseudo-extroversion.
Right. Masking their natural state just to meet a superficial performance requirement, which burns even more of that precious cognitive fuel.
That's the tragedy of it. But here's the crucial question. If introverts are succeeding despite this massive bias, if they manage to break into that tiny 4% of leadership, what are the specific measurable advantages their management style offers that the extrovert ideal completely misses?
Their strength lies not in charisma, but in deliberate thinking and a quality-focused approach. Because they use that long path of deep processing, they inherently take the time they need to think critically, to analyze details, and to seek to understand the underlying reasons why things happen. Their whole approach is holistic, meticulous, and focused on quality over speed.
How does that deliberate process translate into their day-to-day management style?
Well, they tend to foster a highly effective environment for proactive employees. Unlike the classic charismatic leader who might feel the need to always dominate and direct the conversation, the introverted leader is a fantastic listener. They validate their team's initiative.
They don't micromanage.
They don't, because they trust their subordinates to execute, which frees up their own cognitive resources for what they do best: higher level modeling and analysis.
So their leadership is less about being the alpha in the room and more about being the careful strategist who gives other people space to do their best work.
Exactly. In fact, when describing their problem-solving methods in one of the studies, a participant, P015, noted their focus was always on being detailed and holistic. Another leader, P002, said it very plainly. I determined what the best course of action would be through modeling and analysis. That's a very introverted way of solving problems.
It's that systematic, recursive, deep processing taking over. They're valued for their thoroughness, which might seem slower, but it probably leads to fewer critical errors down the line.
That's the core difference. The quality of the output, not the volume of the input, is what matters. And this leads us directly to the absolute necessity of the specialist, the quiet professional who provides the foundational infrastructure we all rely on.
The idea of state capacity.
Right. The ability of a country or an organization to function efficiently. This capacity isn't driven by charisma, it's driven by quiet intelligence. It relies on intense, quiet focus, not on superficial displays of procedural competence.
This brings us to a specific example for the source material that really illustrates this: the story of Ms. Lin and the high-speed rail network.
A phenomenal example. We always celebrate the grand charismatic visions, the CEO, the politician, the person cutting the ribbon. But the actual reality of a modern civilization rests on specialists who master the granular details.
And Ms. Lin's job, managing these incredibly complex load-balancing protocols for the rail network, is a perfect illustration. Her work environment was described as this silent, windowless control room. Just monitors flickering with data, completely removed from the high-speed train she's controlling.
And this is infrastructural power in action. Her expertise is so dense and so quiet that the millions of passengers who rely on that rail line every day will never know her name. Her value is entirely divorced from public display.
Right. There's the story of her spending 48 hours straight wrestling with a microscopic glitch in the signaling software. That's not a problem you can solve with a brainstorming session or a loud discussion.
Absolutely not. That required deep, solitary analysis. She was navigating what they called atomic-level code defects that threatened to paralyze an entire regional transport system.
And her success depended entirely on her ability to sustain that deep, introverted mastery. That long path in her brain, fueled by acetylcholine, was operating at its peak because the environmental stimulus was minimal.
If her environment demanded constant procedural display, if she had to stop every 10 minutes for an enforced team-building meeting, or to give a status update, that rail line would eventually fail.
So the industrial strength of a state, its ability to move people, transfer power, sustain technology, it's all predicated on our society's ability to value and protect the workspace of the quiet specialist like Ms. Lin.
It's a literal demonstration that quiet is not passive, it's foundational.
This leads us naturally to the broader evolutionary view. If quiet is so foundational, why does our ancestral wiring seem to tell us the opposite? Let's move into that, into introversion as a highly adaptive intelligence, looking at evolutionary mismatch and cultural resilience.
Okay, so we have to start with the Savannah theory of happiness. It offers a really crucial lens on why high intelligence often correlates with a desire for less social contact.
Okay, let's go back in time. What did the Savannah environment look like in terms of our social needs?
Well, the human brain evolved over hundreds of thousands of years in the African savanna. Our ancestors lived in these small, tightly knit hunter-gatherer groups, usually around 50 to 150 individuals, what we call Dunbar's number.
And in that harsh environment, social connections were everything.
They were the single most important factor for survival. Being alone meant immediate exposure to predators, no resource sharing, low reproductive success. The ancestral brain's imperative was simple: socialize or die.
So we developed this hardwired primitive impulse to socialize constantly because for millennia, that impulse ensured our survival.
Exactly. Now, jump to the modern world. It's a radical evolutionary mismatch. We live in enormous cities, we're overloaded with constant sensory stimulation, and we manage hundreds or thousands of often superficial connections through technology. The original survival mechanism is now actively maladaptive.
So that ancestral impulse that makes my friend Leo constantly seek external stimulation is actually, it's an obsolete function in today's world.
It can be, yes. It often leads to cognitive fatigue, superficial engagement, and just general distress in our complex, overwhelming environment. And this is where the intelligence paradox comes in, from the research by Kanazawa and Lee.
The paradox being that the world rewards high intelligence, but intelligence often seems to contradict our primal human need for constant connection.
That's the core tension. The researchers suggest that individuals with higher intelligence are simply more adept at coping with and adapting to this new, evolutionarily mismatched modern world. Their highly cognitive, sophisticated brains can successfully override the primitive, hardwired impulse to socialize constantly.
So a preference for solitude isn't a failure to socialize. It's the intelligent brain successfully adapting to conserve energy and optimize resources in an environment that is no longer a small, protective tribal unit.
It's the highest form of cognitive efficiency. The intelligent individual can select social contact based on genuine need for collaboration, for resource exchange, for emotional depth, rather than just blindly following an outdated ancestral instinct that's screaming, "Don't be alone."
So this strategic choice of solitude is a highly sophisticated adaptive strategy.
It is. They're actively constructing their optimal environment rather than passively accepting the overwhelming one that's provided.
That reframes the quiet person as maybe the most successfully adapted organism in the room. This concept of adaptive cognition leads us to the cultural comparison from the sources. How does this strategy show up when we compare populations facing different degrees of life volatility?
You see a profound cross-cultural cognitive dissonance when you compare Western affluent populations with those in the developing world or in disadvantaged environments. Western populations living in stable societies often develop a powerful sense of entitlement.
And entitlement in this context means an expectation that life will be stable.
Yes, the expectation of safety, prosperity, stable legal rights, good health, and just a baseline of happiness. And while these are obviously socially desirable, the research identifies this rigid expectation as a strong counteracting agent of resilience.
Meaning that when those expectations are inevitably unmet, when hardship hits, when ambition fails, the reaction is disproportionately severe.
Precisely. When the world fails to live up to its assumed benevolence, it triggers intense distress, anger, and it significantly increases vulnerability to mental disorders like depression and anxiety. The rigid expectation becomes an internal fragility.
Okay, now let's contrast that with the adaptive cognitions found in populations that are accustomed to chronic volatility and hardship.
Their resilience is built on the opposite premise, the expectation of struggle. They possess these adaptive cognitions where life difficulties and misfortune are viewed as a given, a constant condition of life.
So that mental shift basically disarms unexpected negative events.
It prevents them from having the disastrous psychological effect of an unforeseen catastrophe. They don't have the luxury of entitlement.
So they're mentally prepared for volatility.
Yeah.
What are the specific cognitive strategies they use that reflect this quiet intelligence?
The research highlights three main strategies. First, they prioritize safety and survival over professional aspiration, which is a key shift from Western achievement culture. Second, They hold a firm belief that progress and survival are achieved through hard work and determination, not through favorable external conditions just being handed to them.
Okay, and the third?
And third, and this is most relevant to our deep dive, they practice emotional distancing.
Emotional distancing. Reasoning without relying on emotional feedback. That sounds highly aligned with the deliberate analytical process of the introverted brain.
It's a critical overlap. Emotional distancing means stepping back and judging a difficult circumstance based on cold, reasoned analysis, rather than immediately giving in to your emotional reaction or your gut feeling. It's viewing a traumatic or challenging experience from a necessary distance to safeguard your own sanity and cognitive function.
And that careful, deliberate, emotionless reasoning directly mirrors the strengths of the deep analytical thinking we see in introversion.
Absolutely. A culture that relies on collective survival and strategic anticipation of volatility, which is inherently introverted in its deliberate nature, develops a form of collective quiet intelligence just to endure.
It's survival through cognitive efficiency and strategic anticipation. And we see this adaptive shift emerging even in highly developed but unstable urban environments. This brings us to that second story we looked at, the shift to cognitive resilience in a modern metropolis.
Right. This was a really fascinating case study.
This story detailed how a group of young professionals in a rapidly modernizing city, facing intense global economic and political volatility, they made a conscious decision to shift away from the Western extroverted ideal of performance. They adopted a strategy they called strategic silence.
This is adaptation in real time. They were actively rejecting the cultural demand to be visible and loud.
Exactly. Their withdrawal wasn't motivated by fear, but by a pragmatic need to conserve cognitive resources. They viewed the relentless extroverted performance, the mandatory networking, the aggressive self-promotion, the constant social broadcasting as an unsustainable luxury when volatility was high.
The cost of being seen and being loud outweighed the benefit. When your cognitive resources are constantly strained, maximizing your internal efficiency becomes the ultimate survival mechanism. They recognized that the high stimulation environment was a tax they could no longer afford to pay.
So their strategic silence involved consciously reducing their exposure to the noise, prioritizing these tight-knit, low-energy social circles to minimize that metabolic depletion, and reserving their mental clarity for high-focus work. Their quiet focus became their sophisticated form of civilizational endurance.
It's the intellectual equivalent of a lockdown.
Yeah.
You're building a quiet fortress of the mind to ensure your deep focus work remains unbroken by external chaos. The stability of their collective effort, their ability to sustain complex projects, was anchored in their shared introverted focus.
And it proves that the quiet individual isn't the weak link in a crisis. They're often the anchor of cognitive stability.
That's right.
This entire discussion has validated the internal reality and the external necessity of quiet intelligence. So now let's get into the deep mechanics of why introverted thought leads to such profound breakthroughs. We're going to try to formalize this process using complex systems theory, moving beyond simple trait descriptions and into, well, the mathematics of thought.
This section is really key to proving that introversion isn't just reservedness. It's an active structural mechanism for deepening thought. We can model introversion as a recursive process.
Okay, let's explain recursion simply. We hear it in computer science all the time. What does it mean when you apply it to personality dynamics?
Recursion, in simple terms, is self-reference. It's when the definition of something relies on a simpler version of itself. When you apply that to thought, it means your current internal state doesn't just incorporate new information, it incorporates and amplifies the results of your previous internal state.
So if I think about a problem today, tomorrow, when I think about it again, I'm not starting from scratch. I'm starting from the detailed process solution I reached yesterday, and I'm deepening it.
Exactly. Mathematically, the current introverted state, which we'll call IND, depends recursively on the previous state, IN1D. It acts like a highly secure, self-reinforcing knowledge loop. It's structurally similar to a blockchain, actually, where the integrity of the current block is guaranteed by its connection to all the preceding blocks.
That ensures continuity and depth. We have two variables here, N for the time step and D for the depth level. What determines the depth?
The depth level, D, just refers to how fundamental the cognitive state is. So superficial thoughts have a low D, and they change quickly. Deeper levels with a high D relate to core memory structures, self-contemplation, long-term planning. They evolve much more slowly, but they're highly stable. But crucially, the equation includes these amplification coefficients, K and M, which are greater than 1.
Why is that amplification factor, M being greater than 1, so important for introversion?
That is the source of its profound power. The nonlinear component M dictates that the influence of the previous internal state is amplified. It doesn't just add, it multiplies. And high values of K and M lead to the exponential growth of introverted processes.
Exponential growth in thought. That's a huge claim.
It is. But it reflects the intense, high-fidelity internal analysis and active self-development that we see in deep reflection. If you spend sustained, quiet time wrestling with a complex idea, the quality of your insights doesn't grow linearly. It compounds. Small shifts in foundational understanding can result in exponentially larger, qualitative breakthroughs in your perspective and knowledge. This is why solitary genius is so often recursive.
And that contrasts sharply with the mathematical model of extroversion, which you described as iteration.
Right. Extroversion is modeled as an iterative process. Iteration is just simple sequential accumulation. The current state is simply the previous state plus the new external stimulus. It's a straight line. It's an expansion of experience through rapid interaction with the external world.
So iteration is a linear accumulation of new data points, while recursion is the nonlinear deepening of existing data points.
Precisely. And both are necessary. The iterative process is fantastic for speed, for volume, for broad exposure, but it won't produce the depth of insight you need for atomic-level problem solving.
And finally, the highly adaptive middle ground, the ambivert. How do we formalize that flexibility?
Introversion is formalized as transitivity, and it's not simply being 50% introverted and 50% extroverted. It's a dynamic, flexible state that actively mediates and integrates both the internal recursive process and the external iterative process.
So the ambivert acts as a synergist, leveraging the best of both worlds.
Yes. The transitive function includes a synergistic component, and this component accounts for the nonlinear boost in adaptability. When an ambivert successfully integrates deep recursive reflection with the necessary external iterative response, the interaction between those two processes generates a whole new level of flexibility. High transitivity means the individual can maintain stability and optimal function across rapidly changing conditions.
They can dive deep and then surface quickly to communicate their findings.
Exactly.
That mathematical model provides hard proof that the depth and repeated rethinking in introversion are fundamentally designed to produce exponentially growing internal results. So let's connect this formalized power back to tangible industrial success. Specifically, the story of Dr. Arasawa, the semiconductor specialist.
Dr. Arasawa is the embodiment of introversion as a monetized, recursive process, especially within that East Asian developmental model. His work was highly specialized, and it was focused on creating one of his firm's highest value patent conversions.
And we know he found the typical high-energy office draining the exact opposite of the dopamine spike Leo was chasing. His choice to work in low-stimulation environments was essential for him.
Absolutely. His brain was operating in that preferred acetylcholine-fueled state, focused entirely on deep, solitary processing. His task wasn't sequential or iterative. It was complex mathematical modeling, mapping atomic-level defects in silicon wafers. And that required years of intense internal processing and strategic silence.
So while his colleagues might have been engaged in iterative sequential tasks, the constant meetings, the fast-paced coordination, Arasawa was engaged in recursion. He was just deepening his understanding of a tiny, critical failure point.
And the outcome was a direct, hard metric example of optimized internal silence providing a competitive edge. His sustained, multi-year internal processing translated directly into one of the firm's most valuable intellectual properties. In these advanced industrial models, the capacity for intense, quiet focus on abstract mathematical and technical problems isn't a soft skill. It's the core competitive differentiator.
The silent intelligence, formalized through recursion, created a massive, tangible economic result. This forces us to address the systemic implications. If introverted work is so crucial for high-value output, how must the modern workplace fundamentally change to harness this power instead of actively suppressing it?
The research provides some very clear, actionable steps for organizational adaptation. The first principle has to be addressing the sensory overload issue. Maximize environment, minimize stimuli.
Meaning reducing the core causes of over-arousability.
Exactly. Organizations need to provide tools to mitigate sensory overload. Things like installing sound barriers, encouraging the use of high-quality noise-canceling headsets, and aggressively providing flexible work options, including remote work. The goal is to allow the introverted brain to control its external input so it can focus on deep processing.
That solves the environmental demand. What about the management structure?
Yeah.
If introverts need that long path for processing, I imagine close supervision must be detrimental.
It is, because close supervision inherently threatens the time needed for deep thought. So the next principle is prioritize autonomy. Introverts thrive when they have choice in how and when their tasks are completed. They need to trust that their deep, non-visible process will be valued.
It's why many successful introverts move into consulting or self-employment.
It is. It provides the autonomy necessary to optimize their cognitive environment. Organizations have to transition from managing visibility to managing measurable output.
And finally, we saw some strong empirical critiques of mandated collaboration. Brainstorming, in particular, seems counterproductive for original thought.
The literature is very clear on this. Serious original thought is almost always an individual act. Mandated collaboration, like forced brainstorming sessions or enforced teamwork, it often stifles the most valuable creativity. These settings favor the most aggressive extroverts and encourage groupthink.
Right, where complex, original ideas, which need time to formulate, are just dismissed in favor of simpler, immediate consensus.
And there's a neurological reason for that stifling effect. Studies show that when individuals are pressured to oppose an immediate group consensus, the amygdala, the brain's fear center, becomes activated. This physical response signals a fear of rejection, which actively suppresses the cognitive functions you need for creative risk-taking. Creativity is enhanced when people enjoy privacy, freedom from interruption, and the space to engage in that recursive thinking.
It seems organizations need to recognize that not all work is iterative. Some of it, the most valuable work, requires deep, slow recursion.
The key takeaway from all the sources, and the ultimate systemic implication, is that the goal isn't introvert dominance. It's not about abandoning collaboration entirely. The goal is balance. It's about creating a fuller, richer world by including and respecting the functional necessity of different work styles. The organization that protects the quiet focus of its specialists is the organization that will sustain its competitive edge.
This entire deep dive has been a complete reframing of introversion, moving it from a soft, perceived personality deficit to a scientifically validated, high-functioning, powerful form of intrapersonal intelligence.
Indeed. We've systematically validated this capacity. Its unique architecture, the fast dopamine saturation and the critical long-path acetylcholine dominance, is proven by neurobiology. Its preference for solitude is validated by evolutionary necessity as a sophisticated adaptation to the modern world. And its utility is measured by hard metrics, the exponential growth of recursive thought that sustains the advanced infrastructure of modern civilization. The quiet individual is the silent, essential engine of complexity.
The power of quiet isn't just philosophical or an individual preference. It's actually foundational to our collective function.
The contemporary world, relentlessly driven by the extrovert ideal and this of perpetual connection, it imposes a massive and often debilitating cognitive debt on roughly half the population, forcing them to function suboptimally. However, the deepest forms of collective survival and the very integrity of the physical and digital infrastructure we rely upon are increasingly dependent on those individuals who have mastered the art of low stimulation, high-fidelity internal processing, a silent, powerful force that maintains its integrity by actively choosing disconnection and valuing the depth of their own internal world.